Haley glided across the Grand Lennox ballroom like she belonged to the chandeliers, all white satin and confidence that hadn't been bruised yet. I sat at table 12, the family overflow corner wedged near the swinging kitchen doors. Every time they opened, a rush of heat and clattering trays spilled into our little exile. The band played smooth jazz while silver buckets of champagne sweated under crystal light. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan looked smudged by a coming storm. Inside, I felt ranked without anyone having to say the number out loud. I had left Ella with Tasha at 6 in the evening, promising my daughter this was a grown-up night and that we would have our own dance party tomorrow. Ella believed me because she always believes me, even when she can tell I'm hiding worry behind a smile. She had wanted to wear the navy dress we found at a thrift store, the one that made her look like a tiny movie star. I said no, not because she would misbehave, but because my family's eyes can be sharp, and I didn't want her to feel them. At 29, I could start an IV in the dark, calm a panicked parent with 2 sentences, and still lie awake doing rent math like it was a nightly prayer. I wore a plum dress I'd bought 2 years ago, hem slightly frayed if you look too close. That kind of detail is invisible to rich people, but it screams to women like my mother, who notices everything and forgives almost nothing. I came alone, and the empty chair beside me felt louder than the music. My mother drifted through cocktail hour in pale gold, collecting compliments the way some people collect stamps. When she reached table 12, she let her concern land on me like a public announcement. I could feel her disappointment without needing words. My father hovered behind her, polite, distant, the same man who taught me how to ride a bike, but never learned how to sit with my feelings. Around us, cousins with graduate degrees laughed about vacations and investments. Table 12 was where they put the relatives who might spill something on the linen. Across the room, Evan stood with Brielle, my cousin and now his wife, his hand resting on her belly, like he had always planned to be a father, just not to my child. Brielle wore her pregnancy like a crown. Evan wore his smile like armor. 5 years ago, he vanished right after I told him I was pregnant, leaving me with nausea, fear, and a schedule of prenatal appointments I drove to alone. 6 months later, he married Brielle, and my family called it a love story. I called it proof that money can rewrite people's memories. Dinner came in 7 courses, each plate arranged like art. I tasted almost none of it. The couple beside me compared ski towns. Someone across the table flashed a ring that could have paid for a year of Ella's after-school program. I nodded, smiled, listened, and kept my hands folded so no one would notice the tiny tremor that follows me after long shifts. I save children for a living. Somehow that still didn't earn me a seat closer to the dance floor. When the DJ announced the first dance, the room rose as one organism. Haley melted into her new husband's arms, and for a moment I let myself feel proud before the loneliness rushed back in. Couples followed, laughter swelling, glasses clinking, everyone slipping into the easy warmth of being paired. That was when Evan peeled away from Brielle and headed straight for me. He leaned close, like we were sharing an old joke, and I felt my body remember every time I tried to keep him happy. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He slid a remark into my ear about legitimacy, about how Brielle's baby would be celebrated while my daughter would always be the lesson I was supposed to learn. I kept my face smooth. I let the insult burn behind my teeth. All I could think was Ella at home, small and trusting, and how I would never let anyone call her a mistake again. Evan drifted back into the crowd, satisfied, while Brielle watched me with a smile that felt like a verdict. I sank into my chair and pretended my eyes weren't wet. The storm outside finally broke, rain streaking the windows and blurring the city lights into watercolor. I considered slipping out, catching a cab, going home to my daughter and the honest mess of our life. But shame has a way of pinning you in place, especially when your own family is the one holding the pins. That was when I noticed the man at the bar. He wasn't laughing or circulating or trying to be seen. He stood still, shoulders relaxed, as if the room moved around him by permission. Luca DeSantis, black suit, dark hair, a calm face carved into sharp lines, and eyes the color of whiskey in the chandelier light. He was watching me. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with a steady focus that made my skin prickle. I looked away on instinct, then back, and he was still there, like he didn't believe I should disappear. And somehow I couldn't stop staring back. His gaze stayed on me even after I forced myself to look away. It wasn't the quick glance people give a woman sitting alone, and it wasn't the sugary pity my relatives had been dripping over me all night. It felt steady, deliberate, like he was refusing to let me shrink into the corner I'd been assigned. I told myself he was just curious. I told myself to stop caring, but my throat still burned from Evan's remark, and the rain streaking the windows made the whole ballroom feel like a snow globe I couldn't escape. When I looked up again, the man at the bar was already moving. He crossed the room without the usual social warm-up. No hunting for introductions. No hovering at the edge like he needed permission. People unconsciously shifted to make space. I tried to label him, to file him under donor or politician or wealthy friend of the groom, but he didn't fit into Haley's world of polite power. His presence felt older than that. My instincts screamed to leave. That's what motherhood trained into me. When something feels uncertain, I remove Ella from it, even if she's not in the room. I imagined slipping out, catching a cab, and heading straight to Tasha's place. Then I pictured my mother seeing my empty seat and turning my exit into a story about how I always run, how I can't handle being around people who have their lives together. The anger that rose in me was small but sharp. I stayed. He stopped at table 12 like it was the only place he intended to be. The kitchen doors swung behind us, releasing a burst of heat and the clang of dishes. But he didn't even glance back. He pulled out the empty chair beside me and sat down, unhurried, as if the seating chart was a rumor. Up close, Luca DeSantis looked less like a wedding guest, and more like a man used to walking into rooms where decisions get made. He kept a respectful distance, not touching me, not trapping me, and somehow that restraint made my skin more aware of him. He smelled like cedar and rain on stone. When his eyes met mine, I felt seen and examined at the same time. I tried to hold my face neutral, but he watched the effort under my composure like he could read the strain in my breathing. In my memory, he didn't start by flirting. He started by noticing what everyone else pretended not to see. He noticed I'd been alone all night. He noticed the tightness in my shoulders after Evan walked away, and the way I forced my hands to unclench as if anyone who saw me shaking would win. I realized he had noticed Evan too, and my stomach dropped. Evan loves an audience. Luca watched the audience, then looked straight through Evan's performance and into me. I gave Luca silence. He let the quiet sit between us until it stopped feeling like pressure and started feeling like permission. Then he offered me something that would change the way the room treated me. A public move. In my head, it translated into one clear action. A dance. Not a secret one. Not a pity dance, but a visible one. Where my mother couldn't pretend I was invisible and Evan couldn't pretend he still owned the narrative. Luca wasn't selling me romance. He was offering cover. He was also admitting, without drama, that he had his own reasons for wanting to look settled in front of certain people. That honesty made my distrust loosen. Still, my mind raced through risks the way I run through emergency protocols. I had a daughter. I had a job. I had a life built on predictable routines and careful choices. I did not have room for mysterious men with expensive suits and unreadable eyes. So I set rules in my head, sharp and specific. One dance. One night. No promises. No personal details. Nothing that would ever reach Ella. If I wanted out, I would step back and he would let me. His hand came toward me, open, steady, patient. I stared at it like it was a doorway. My cheeks burned with humiliation and anger and something I didn't want to name. Then I thought of Evan's words again, and I refused to let them be the last thing that defined my sister's wedding in my memory. I placed my hand in Luca's. His grip was warm, controlled, not possessive. The chair scraped as I stood, and I felt the room tilt before I even moved, like people had been waiting for me to break and were startled to see me rise instead. I didn't look for Evan right away. I kept my gaze forward and let Luca guide me away from table 12. Each step felt like crossing an invisible line. I could sense my mother recalculating. I could sense Haley's surprise. And somewhere behind all that, I could feel Evan staring, realizing one dance was about to rewrite the night. I stepped onto the dance floor, and the bass slid up my legs like a pulse I couldn't ignore. The marble under my heels was cool, slick, expensive, the kind of surface that punished hesitation. Luca's hand stayed light at my back, more a steadying point than a claim, and his other hand held mine as if he already knew my grip would shake. Around us, the room kept breathing, laughing, clinking, but the sound blurred behind the rain tapping the windows. For the first time all night, I stopped looking for an exit and let the song carry me. His lead was quiet, almost invisible, and that made my body listen. Shoulders that had been curled inward all evening lifted a fraction. My chin rose as if it remembered what pride felt like. I exhaled, long and slow, and felt my fingers unclench from the edge of my own shame. My mind kept trying to warn me. Stranger, danger, don't trust. But the rhythm kept answering. Breathe, step, stay. With every turn he guided, I felt the old story of me as a cautionary tale loosen its grip. Not gone, just quieter, like thunder moving farther down the river. The room noticed before I did. My mother's face tightened, then smoothed, like she was recalculating what kind of daughter I was allowed to be. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing with the cautious curiosity he rarely showed me. Haley watched with a soft smile that held surprise and relief, as if my happiness was an extra wedding gift she hadn't expected. Cousins who had ignored me at dinner suddenly tracked my movement, whispering behind napkins. Even strangers paused mid-sip, following Luca's dark suit and my thrift store dress as if contrast itself was entertainment. Evan stared, suddenly pale. Luca didn't perform for them. He didn't spin me fast or pull me close for show. He moved like he'd learned patience the way some men learn violence, as a discipline. His palm stayed at the center of my back, warm through thin fabric, guiding me around other couples with tiny shifts I could feel more than see. When I stumbled, he corrected with a gentleness that made my eyes sting. He never crowded my space, yet I felt covered, like a coat placed over my shoulders in a cold room. For once, attention felt safe, not hungry, not mocking. When the song shifted into the next slow track, he didn't ask permission so much as offer direction. And I let him. We danced long enough for my heartbeat to match the tempo, long enough for my cheeks to cool and my thoughts to sharpen. Then he guided me back through the crowd. People parted as if he carried an invisible badge. At table 12, the empty chair beside me had become his seat, and the corner near the kitchen doors felt less like exile and more like a stage light had swung our way. I sat taller without trying. Curiosity hit us in waves. An aunt drifted over with a smile that asked questions before her mouth moved. My mother followed, eyes scanning Luca's cufflinks, his watch, the way his attention stayed on me instead of wandering. I could feel her trying to place him on the social map. Haley appeared briefly, her veil catching the light, looking between us with a look that said she wanted me happy but also wanted me safe. Luca offered them a story that sounded smooth and ordinary, and I marveled at how easily he made my life seem respected right there, tonight. Evan didn't approach immediately, but his stare pressed against my skin. I saw him near Brielle, whispering something that made her glance over with that same victorious calm. When he finally started toward us, Luca's posture changed almost imperceptibly. He angled his chair, creating space behind me and denying space in front of me, like he was rearranging the room with geometry. I didn't hear what Evan said when he reached our table because I was watching Luca instead. Luca's gaze stayed level, his hand resting on the back of my chair, steady as a lock clicking shut for me. In that moment, I understood this wasn't improvisation. Luca had been watching Evan since the dance began, not with jealousy, but with assessment. His eyes flicked to the exits, to the bar, to the shadows where security staff lingered. I realized he'd chosen the dance floor for visibility and the return to table 12 for control. He wasn't rescuing me for entertainment. He was planting a flag, daring anyone to test it. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made my spine straighten. If Evan wanted to punish me for moving on, Luca had already built the shield tonight. I kept telling myself it would end at the exit doors, that I could thank Luca, return to my life, and tuck this night away. But as the reception rolled on, I felt the lie gaining weight. Every glance we drew was a thread pulling tighter around my ordinary world, around Ella sleeping at Tasha's apartment, around the address in my wallet. Luca leaned close enough for me to sense he was offering me a way to reach him later, something small and sharp like a match. Outside, the rain kept falling, and I wondered who was watching us leave. By the time Haley's wedding thinned into last call laughter, my borrowed confidence was already slipping off my shoulders. I followed the crowd toward the lobby, pretending I wasn't still hearing Evan's cruelty in my head. Luca stayed close, not touching me, just moving like he'd decided I would get out without becoming anyone's entertainment. Outside, rain drummed the awning and turned Midtown into smeared gold. In my clutch, his black business card felt warm, like it had been held too long over a flame. The ride home cut through wet streets and blurred neon. Headlights streaked across the window like white paint. Luca spoke in that calm, measured way that made everything sound manageable, and he offered a practical extension of our little performance. Keep it going for a few weeks so my family would stop circling, stop interrogating, stop treating my singleness like a public flaw. He didn't sell it as romance. He presented it like cover, a shield we could set down later. I surprised myself by wanting to say yes immediately, not because I trusted him, but because I was tired of being small. Then the mother in me took over. I built boundaries in my mind the way I set up sterile trays at work, careful and exact. Ella would stay out of it. No introductions, no sleepovers, no confusion, no fairy tale promises whispered over pancakes. This would be adults playing a role for adult reasons, and if I felt unsafe, I would walk away without guilt. No money changes hands, no rescuing, no debt. I clung to those rules because they were the only way the idea didn't feel reckless. Luca walked me to my building in Washington Heights despite the rain, then left without pressing for more. When I climbed the stairs, the card in my clutch seemed heavier with each step. In my kitchen, with the radiator clicking and the window shaking from wind, I told myself the smart choice was to throw it away. Instead, I slid it into my wallet behind Ella's kindergarten photo, as if that little smile could keep the card from burning through my life. Monday morning arrived like a slap of cold air. Ella padded into my room in sock feet, hair wild, asking for cereal with the certainty that breakfast fixed everything. I packed her lunch, found a missing shoe, and tied her jacket zipper with fingers that still remembered satin tablecloths and marble floors. At the school drop-off, parents waved with wedding rings flashing under gray light. I kissed Ella's forehead and promised I'd be there at pickup, then sat in my car for one long breath, letting the glitter of the weekend dissolve back into real life. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Monitors beeped, a toddler cried, and I washed my hands until they stung. My phone buzzed nonstop in my pocket with my mother's concern. Cousins fishing for details, Haley checking if I was okay. I deleted Brielle's notification without opening it. During a quick break, I finally looked and saw media screenshots flooding the family chat. Someone had posted a photo of Luca and me mid-dance, his hand at my back, my face tilted up like I trusted the world. It looked real enough to convince strangers. Instead of excitement, I felt my stomach drop. Attention had escaped the ballroom, and I couldn't control where it went. That night I cooked pasta, helped Ella practice spelling, and read the same picture book twice because she loved the ending. When she finally fell asleep, her hand curled around her stuffed rabbit. I sat at my dark kitchen table and listened to rain fill the silence. I pulled Luca's card from my wallet. Black stock, silver lettering, clean edges. It didn't just sit there, it burned. The knock came at 10:15, heavy and wrong, not the neighborly tap of someone who forgot their keys. My body went cold before my mind caught up. I checked the chain, then the peephole. 2 men stood there in dark coats, faces flat with patience. One had a tattoo disappearing under his collar. They weren't lost. They were waiting for me. I didn't open the door. I held my phone so tight my fingers ached. One lifted a phone toward the peephole, and the screen filled my warped view with the wedding photo, me and Luca mid-dance, looking like we belonged. Then his mouth shaped a name that landed like a warning. Volkov. I understood right away. Completely. They knew me, and they believed I was Luca's leverage. I backed away from the door and listened for sound from Ella's room. The men knocked again, slower, like they had time to spare. When they finally walked off, their footsteps faded, but the hallway still felt occupied. I checked the locks, then stood in my kitchen shaking with Luca's card in my palm like a coal. The safe choice was to cut the thread and pretend the weekend never happened. But Ella's breathing was the only sound I trusted. I found the number and pressed call. He answered, clipped. I gave him my address and said Ella was asleep in back room. Minutes became a checklist. I slid my purse strap over my wrist, kept my keys ready, and set my shoes by the door. I turned off the living room lamp so the peephole view would not silhouette me. I checked the window locks, pulled the curtains tight, and placed my phone on speaker near my ear. Every sound made me flinch. Distant elevator cables, a neighbor's television, rain tapping the fire escape. At 11, I told myself, they could come back. In 15 minutes, Luca said he would be here. I went to Ella, watched her sleep, and held breath. The buzzer sounded once, low and certain, and my knees went weak. I checked the peephole and saw Luca, then a second man behind him with the posture of a guard. I opened the door just enough for the chain to hold, then let them in quickly. Luca moved through my apartment like he already knew the angles, eyes flicking from hallway to kitchen to windows. The other man, Marco, stayed near the entry, listening to the building as if it breathed. Luca's presence changed the air. My fear did not vanish, but it tightened into something I could use. I told Luca everything in a rush, pointing to the door, describing the heavy knock, the phone lifted to the peephole, the photo of us on the dance floor. I repeated the name Volkov and watched Luca's jaw set, as if that word carried a history. He explained, in the fewest phrases, that the men sounded like Bratva, a Russian crew testing lines he would not move. Someone had fed them those wedding images, enough to claim I mattered to him. In their logic, truth was optional. Leverage was the language. Fake or real, I could still be used tonight. Anger came next, hot and embarrassing. Part of me wanted to blame Luca for opening a door I had kept locked for years. I had been surviving, not shining, because survival felt safer. Now strangers knew my address because I let him lead me across a dance floor. Then I glanced at Ella's bedroom door, and the anger collapsed into guilt. Luca saw where my eyes kept going, and his steadiness made room for my fear instead of judging it. He treated my apartment like a threat map, and that terrified me more than their knock. I hated needing him. Luca's plan was clear. I could not stay here tonight. The building had too many doors, too many blind corners, too many people who did not know they were part of my risk. Marco kept watch by the window while Luca pushed me to move with speed, not panic. I grabbed wallet, keys, work badge, and Ella's papers. I packed pajamas, a sweatshirt, and her rabbit, then froze, realizing how little our life fit in a bag. Luca insisted I take only what mattered and promised the rest could wait. My hands shook, but my choices stayed clear for now. I woke Ella with the gentlest touch I could manage, murmuring comfort into her hair. She blinked, confused, then wrapped her arms around my neck the way she did after bad dreams. That nearly broke me. I carried her to the couch, slipped on her sneakers, and handed her the rabbit like it was a passport. Then I called Tasha. I did not explain everything, only enough to make her voice sharpen into focus. She arrived in a hoodie, eyes wide but hands steady, and started packing snacks and chargers without asking questions. Seeing her made me breathe at last. 15 minutes after the call, my apartment looked stripped, as if we were guests. Luca carried the bag. Marco took the lead in the hallway, and I kept Ella pressed to my chest, her rabbit tucked under my arm. Tasha locked up, then squeezed my shoulder once, a promise. When I stepped into the corridor, the air smelled of damp paint and fryer grease. Every shadow felt watched. I looked back at my door, the peeling number, the cheap lock, the life I fought for. I did not cry. I followed Luca to the elevator and let the doors close. Downstairs, a SUV waited at the curb, engine humming, rain beating on the hood. Marco checked the street and opened the back door. Luca guided me inside with a touch. Ella climbed in beside me, rabbit in her lap, eyes heavy with sleep. The SUV pulled away, tires whispering on wet asphalt, and my block blurred into streaks of light. Luca's plan meant a penthouse, guards, and rules I did not understand. I pressed my forehead to the glass and counted Ella's breaths, trying to believe leaving was brave, not reckless. Ahead, his world waited, quiet on top, loud underneath. By the time the SUV slid into the underground garage, Ella's head was heavy on my shoulder and my nerves were raw. Marco went first, scanning corners like he expected the concrete to move. Luca kept a hand near my elbow without grabbing, guiding us to a private elevator that needed a key fob before it would even blink awake. The doors opened into silence so complete I could hear my own pulse. No hallway, no neighbors' doors, no mailboxes, just glass, pale stone, and a view that made the city look like a toy set someone forgot to put away. The penthouse wasn't cozy. It was beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, designed for looking, not living. My shoes sounded too loud on the floor. The furniture sat far apart, as if it had been told to keep its distance. Luca moved through it like it belonged to his bones, flipping locks, checking the terrace doors, tapping something on a wall panel that I guessed controlled cameras. He was calm, and that calm threatened to irritate me, because it meant he had done this before. Within minutes, he laid out what he had already set in motion. My hospital supervisor had been called. My schedule had been covered under an emergency leave. Ella's school had been notified that we were handling a family situation, and a tutor would come here each morning so she wouldn't fall behind. The efficiency should have comforted me. Instead, my pride snapped awake. My life was not a suitcase he could pack for me. I had worked too hard to keep my bills paid and my daughter steadied to be rearranged like a chess piece. Ella barely registered the argument happening inside my head. She was half asleep, clutching her rabbit, blinking at the height and the lights. Luca led us to a guest room that was bigger than my whole apartment. The bed looked like a cloud someone had framed. The sheets smelled like laundry, soap, and money. I told Ella, with the softest voice I could manage, that we were having a sleepover somewhere safe. I brushed her hair back, tucked her in, and watched her small body disappear into the pillows. My chest tightened with the kind of guilt that doesn't need words. Luca hovered at the doorway like he was trying not to take up space, which was almost funny given how much space he naturally owned. He pointed out an intercom button in the nearest bathroom, then stepped back, giving me control where he could. Still, I could feel his security net tightening around us. invisible but real. I wanted to tell him I could handle my own emergencies. I also wanted to collapse, because I had been handling everything alone for so long that help felt like a foreign language. When he finally left me with the quiet, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened for any sound beyond Ella's breathing. Morning arrived without sirens, just a pale strip of light across the floor and the distant hum of traffic far below. I wandered into the kitchen and found Luca already there, sleeves rolled, moving with the unshowy focus of someone who calmed himself by doing. He made pancakes like it mattered, measuring, flipping, wiping a spill before it dried. Ella patted in, drawn by the smell, and Luca dropped to one knee so he could meet her at eye level. He asked practical things through me, as if collecting a map of her world. Allergies, favorite cartoons, which cup she used at home. Watching him pay attention made my throat sting. Most adults tolerated Ella. He treated her like a person. Later, a tutor arrived with a canvas tote and a cheerful calm that made me feel even more displaced. Ella sat at a wide table that could have hosted my entire family at Thanksgiving, working on letters while I hovered nearby, fighting the urge to apologize for existing in someone else's life. Luca drifted in and out, taking calls in a low voice behind a glass door, then returning to check on Ella's progress like this was normal. After the lesson, Ella begged for a drawing, and Luca sketched buildings with clean, confident lines, teaching her how shadows worked. He did it patiently, not rushing, not showing off. I watched from the counter with my arms folded, pretending my heartbeat wasn't changing its rhythm. That night, when Ella was tucked in again, the penthouse went quiet the way snow quiets a street. Luca stood on the terrace, the city glittering behind him, and I felt his presence in my skin like warmth near a heater. Safety was seductive. So was the way he never pushed, only waited, as if I mattered enough to choose. Then Ella, in her sleep, mumbled and reached for a hand that wasn't mine, and when I leaned close I saw her rabbit tucked against Luca's skyline sketch. Earlier she had asked with innocent certainty whether we could come back tomorrow. Not for the view. For him. My stomach dropped. The Bratva had names and photos, but this attachment had roots. If Luca vanished, Ella would ask why, and I'd have nothing gentle to offer. I couldn't stay ignorant. I needed the full truth about Luca DeSantis before it turned into something permanent, even if it scared me. Safety has a sound. I learned in Luca DeSantis's penthouse. The hush of thick glass, the click of locks, the absence of strangers in the hall. It should have calmed me. Instead, it made my nerves louder, because Ella was starting to treat this place like home, and she was starting to treat him like he belonged with us. On our second morning, she wandered in barefoot and claimed the same stool at the kitchen island. Luca made pancakes without asking for praise, moving around her with quiet patience. I watched her grin at him and felt a cold thread of fear cut through the warmth. The Bratva was a danger I could picture. A child bonding was a danger I couldn't control. That was when the word I'd been avoiding, Mafia, rose in my throat. I had been calling it his business because that was easier. But the men at my door hadn't cared about restaurants. They cared about leverage, and leverage only mattered if Luca's world had teeth. While Ella colored with her tutor, I forced myself to stop pretending ignorance was safer. I needed to know what I had brought near my daughter, and what my daughter was already letting into her heart. Luca didn't glamorize anything when he explained. He spoke like someone describing a storm pattern. Calm facts, hard edges, no poetry. His restaurants were real and public, the part of him you could put on a billboard. But there was another structure underneath. He managed territory the way other men managed assets. He kept alliances with people who didn't use contracts. He enforced boundaries with consequences, not speeches. The code, as I understood it, was blunt. Civilians stayed out of it, kids stayed off limits, debts got paid, and disrespect always cost something. He said restraint was the only thing that kept the city from burning. The Bratva didn't respect restraint. They read it as weakness. They pushed into places that weren't theirs just to see who would blink. And now they had my face in their phones, my address in someone's pocket, my child sleeping upstairs. Knowing the truth didn't make me run. It made me furious. Furious at myself for letting Ella sleep under a roof I didn't understand. Furious at Evan for ever shrinking my world enough that I'd grab a stranger's hand at a wedding. Furious at whoever had turned a dance into a threat. Marco arrived before my anger cooled. His expression was carved from bad news. Luca listened, still as stone, and I sat gripping my knees like they could keep me steady. The leak had a name. Dylan Carter, my cousin. The one with a new plan and an old excuse. The one who showed up at holidays asking for money like it was a small favor, then acted wounded when I said no because I needed rent and daycare. All those little moments I'd filed under family drama suddenly clicked into something uglier. Marco had tracked months of quiet betrayal. Dylan had been feeding the Russians names and details, pointing out soft targets. When the wedding photos hit social media, Dylan recognized a chance and sold it. He even hinted the relationship began as a performance. In their world, that didn't make it harmless. It made it convenient. Then came the second punch. Dylan wasn't free. The Bratva had him, not as a rescue, but as insurance against Luca. If Luca struck first, Dylan would become a message. The idea turned my stomach. Dylan had endangered Ella. Dylan had endangered me. And still, some stubborn part of me pictured him as family, stupid and desperate, not pure evil. I wanted to be the kind of woman who could say he deserved whatever came. I couldn't. Maybe that was softness. Maybe it was the part of me that still believed blood mattered, even when it failed you. So I pushed Luca toward the only option that didn't feel like surrender or revenge. A meeting. A negotiation. Not a romantic stunt. Not a grand rescue. But a conscience choice. If my life was going to be traded, I wanted to be in the room where it happened. If Ella's safety was the prize, I wanted my voice attached to it. Luca didn't like it. I could tell by the way his attention narrowed, the way Marco's shoulders tightened when the name Volkov surfaced again. A sit-down was what the Bratva wanted. A stage where they could demand territory and watch Luca choose between pride and peace. And if Luca refused, Dylan's life would be the bill they sent. I hated that calculus. I hated that my cousin had forced it. But I hated more the idea of staying silent while men negotiated over my child. By late afternoon, the plan was set. Cold air pressed against the windows, and the city below looked sharp-edged and indifferent. Luca made calls, Marco checked routes, and I packed like a nurse on a disaster drill. Essentials, comfort, nothing sentimental. Before we left, I stood at Ella's door and watched her sleep, promising myself I would not let men like Volkov decide what happened to her. When Luca held the elevator open, I stepped in, knowing I was walking toward a warehouse, and a man who used fear like currency, and I also knew I wasn't going to be anyone's chess piece again. The ride to the warehouse felt like moving through someone else's nightmare. Luca sat beside me in the back of a tinted SUV, Marco in front, the city sliding past in blurred streaks of sodium light. Cold seeped through the glass even with the heat running. I kept picturing Ella's small body curled under unfamiliar sheets, and I kept telling myself I was doing this for her. My hands stayed folded in my lap so no one could see them shake. Each mile squeezed harder. We turned off the bright avenues into an industrial grid that smelled of wet metal and old fuel. Warehouses hunched behind chain-link fences, their windows filmed with grime. Luca said nothing, but the way he watched intersections told me he was mapping escape routes in real time. When the SUV slowed, my stomach dropped. The building we stopped at looked abandoned, yet two dark sedans waited near a loading door like they belonged there. That quiet confirmation was worse than sirens. We were already expected. Inside, the air changed. It was colder, sharper, and carried the faint bite of rust. Overhead lights buzzed, leaving corners in shadow. Shipping containers lined the walls like silent witnesses. In the center sat a folding table and 3 chairs, a cheap stage for expensive decisions. Luca guided me to one side without touching my arm, just angling his body so I stayed behind him. Across the table, a man waited with the stillness of practiced patience. Sergei Volkov. His gaze landed on me first. Volkov's face was ordinary in the way a knife can look like any other piece of metal until it's in your hand. Gray hair, neat suit, eyes that didn't waste motion. He looked at Luca the way a broker looks at a rival, then back at me as if I were a number on a ledger. I understood, with a sick clarity, that my fear was part of his leverage. The terms arrived like a receipt. Territory demanded. Dylan exchanged. Civilians spared if Luca complied. My mouth went dry. I could feel Luca's presence beside and slightly in front of me, steady as a wall. But the wall didn't change what Volkov was doing. He was shrinking me into a pressure point. He was turning my apartment door, my daughter's bed, and my cousin's bad choices into bargaining chips. I thought about the photo they'd waved at my peephole, the casual certainty in their tone, and something in me snapped cleanly. I was done being a currency people passed around. I stood, surprised by my own legs obeying. My voice didn't come out loud in my memory. It came out sharp, like truth you've been swallowing too long. I told him, in essence, that threatening mothers in their homes wasn't business. It was cowardice, dressed up as strategy. I drew a line that felt carved into my bones. Children and civilians were not tools. If he wanted to posture at Luca, fine. But he would not use my daughter's sleep as a negotiating tactic again. For a beat, the warehouse went so still I could hear the lights hum. Volkov watched me the way men like him watch fire, not because they fear it, but because they respect what it can do if it spreads. Luca shifted a fraction closer, not to silence me, but to show I wasn't alone in that line. I realized my outburst hadn't ruined his plan. It had opened it. He let Volkov absorb my refusal, then offered something that sounded like surrender at first. Luca described giving up the blocks Volkov wanted, but his calm made me listen for the trap. He laid out how that patch of territory was about to become a headache. Rezoning whispers, redevelopment plans, values shifting the moment the city made announcements. Volkov could take it and inherit the mess. In exchange, Luca demanded something Volkov didn't expect from a concession. A formal peace agreement, clear borders, and one non-negotiable rule written into their new reality. Civilians, especially children, stayed off the board permanently. Volkov didn't smile, but I saw calculation settle behind his eyes. He wasn't being beaten with fists. He was being boxed in with numbers and optics. Taking the blocks benefited him, even if he suspected Luca was handing him a poisoned gift wrapped in politeness. He accepted with the efficiency of someone who preferred paperwork to chaos, and the room exhaled. Dylan would be dropped at a hospital and warned to disappear for months. The message was clear. Luca had protected us without lighting war. Outside, air slapped my face and I breathed again. Drizzle started, turning the pavement dark. My legs felt unreliable as we reached the SUV, adrenaline draining so fast it left me hollow. Luca's hand hovered near my elbow without grabbing, giving me choice. Once the doors shut, the city noise dulled, and I finally shook. I stared at my palms, remembering the line I'd drawn. Then I felt Luca's attention settle on me, close and unguarded. Whatever had been fake was cracking, and I knew. Inside the SUV, the warehouse clung to me like cold smoke. My palms were damp, my knees hollow, and the city outside the tinted windows slid by in smeared ribbons of light. Marco drove as if the streets were carved into him. Luca sat close enough that I could feel his warmth through my coat, but he didn't crowd me. He turned his attention toward me like a steady beacon. Adrenaline is a liar. It tells you you're fine until it drains, and then it leaves you shaking over your own breathing. My throat tightened with the delayed understanding that I had walked into a room built for intimidation and walked out with Ella still safe upstairs. I kept seeing Volkov's patient eyes and the way my name had been treated like currency. Then I remembered myself standing anyway, drawing a line around children and ordinary people. Pride hit first, guilt followed. I had dragged a stranger's world toward my child. I had accepted one dance to survive a wedding, and that choice traveled through photos and phones and men in hallways until it reached my front door. Luca hadn't promised fairy tales. He had offered reality, sharp-edged and controlled, and someone powerful had treated my fear as something to handle, not something to mock. In the hush between traffic lights, Luca's focus narrowed until the rest of the car faded. His calm didn't erase what happened. It held it. I could tell he was watching for the moment my courage tipped into collapse. I didn't want to fall apart in front of him, but my body didn't ask permission. When I looked at him, I saw restraint wearing tenderness. The kiss wasn't planned. It wasn't a prize or a claim. It was the simplest thing I could do with leftover fear. I leaned in, and he met me halfway, slow enough that I could stop, steady enough that I didn't. His mouth was warm, brief against mine, like a promise made without words. For one suspended beat, I felt protected without being pitied. Then the world returned. The engine's soft hum. Marco's eyes in the mirror keeping respectful distance. The reminder that I was still a mother first. Luca didn't chase the moment. He let it pass, like he was giving me room to decide what it meant. That gentleness scared me more than boldness. I had spent years being cornered by expectations. In that car, for the first time, affection felt like an open door, not a lock. By the time we reached the penthouse, my pulse had settled into a heavy thud. The elevator rose in silence, doors opening onto that wide, glassy quiet that still felt like borrowed air. I moved on instinct toward the room where Ella slept. The sight of her under the duvet undid me. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under one arm. I brushed hair from her forehead and felt my chest ache with gratitude and dread in the same breath. Standing there, I understood the real danger wasn't only men like Volkov. It was the way Ella's world could be rearranged by adult choices she didn't understand. She had started to smile when Luca appeared, folding him into her new idea of safe. If this ended badly, her heartbreak would be quiet and long, living in questions I couldn't answer without breaking her trust. Morning came pale over the skyline. Luca didn't act like last night entitled him to anything. He acted more careful. In my memory, he laid out an exit like a life jacket, protection in the background, distance if I wanted it, a clean start somewhere my name wasn't already a rumor. He made it clear I could choose, and that choice mattered more to him than proximity. He mentioned options that sounded impossible. A different neighborhood, a different name on the mailbox, Ella in a school where no one whispered. I listened, weighing each possibility against the fact that my daughter still liked her own pillow. I hated how much I wanted to stay. Not for the penthouse or the cameras, but for the feeling of being seen without being judged. Still, I knew hiding here would shrink me in a different way. Fear had already taken enough. I needed the hospital again. The antiseptic air, the beeping monitors, the steady work of keeping kids alive. I needed to prove my identity wasn't only target or protected. It was nurse, mother, woman, stubborn survivor. So I decided I would go back soon. With discreet security I didn't have to explain. With routes changed and doors watched. I could feel Luca's world holding at the edges instead of wrapping around my throat. And as I pictured walking into the pediatric unit again, I also pictured Evan's face at the wedding, the way his attention sharpened when the room shifted. I could feel him circling, collecting, looking for a weakness he could dress up as concern. The next fight wouldn't be in a warehouse. It would be in daylight, in custody language, in places I once believed were safe. Going back to the hospital felt like stepping into a river I used to know by heart. The air tasted of antiseptic and coffee, and the monitors sang their steady warnings like distant birds. I moved from room to room, checking IV lines, wiping tiny foreheads, pretending my hands were not still remembering warehouse cold. Normal routines returned, but they returned altered. I noticed every exit sign. I tracked reflections in glass doors. When an elevator dinged behind me, my shoulders tightened before my mind caught up. Even my badge lanyard felt louder, as if it announced me to strangers. Luca had promised the protection would be invisible, and it was, mostly. A man in a maintenance jacket lingered near the parking gate longer than anyone needed to. A second sedan seemed to appear behind my bus twice in one morning, then vanish at the same light. Inside the staff lounge, my phone stayed face down, but I could feel it buzzing with the kind of worry that never becomes a notification. I told myself I was imagining patterns. Then I caught Evan's name on the visitor log, and my stomach dropped. Years passed, but his shadow still knew mine. I finished rounds at 2:30 p.m. and headed toward the garage, hoping the late shift traffic would hide me. The fluorescent lights made everything look sickly, even the concrete. Evan stepped out from beside a pillar like he had rehearsed it. He did not touch me, but he blocked the easiest path to my car. His eyes flicked over my scrubs, my tired face, the security camera above us, as if he was collecting evidence. I felt my pulse in my fingertips, and I hated that he could still trigger it. I screamed to run, but my feet held. He came with the confidence of a man who had abandoned the hard parts and returned for the benefits. In my memory, his mouth moved fast, spilling judgment about the kind of man I had been seen with, warning that Luca meant danger, implying I had put Ella in a dirty world. Then he aimed for the one weapon that still made me feel small. He framed fatherhood as a courtroom right, not a responsibility. And I understood he was threatening police, lawyers, and custody papers. My anger rose hot, but my voice stayed steady inside my chest for once. Evan leaned closer, as if proximity could rewrite history, and that was when the air changed. I noticed it the way you notice a storm shift, before you see the clouds. Marco appeared first at the garage entrance, scanning corners with a professional calm. Luca followed, dressed like he belonged anywhere, but moving like he owned the space. They did not rush. They simply arrived, and Evan's performance lost its rhythm. Luca positioned himself beside me, not in front of me, and somehow that felt more respectful and more dangerous at the same time. Only then did I breathe again. Luca did not raise his voice or threaten fists. He brought paper. Marco handed him a slim file, and I watched Evan's eyes flicker toward it like a man recognizing a mirror he did not want. Luca's presence communicated consequences, the kind stamped by judges, not whispered in alleys. In my mind, I saw the facts laid out. Evan's long absences, the support he never paid, the messages he never answered when Ella was sick. There were dates, receipts, and a petition ready to file, plus a restraining order draft if harassment continued. The power changed in seconds, utterly undeniable. Evan backed away with a tight smile that could not hide panic. He tried to regain dignity by looking around, as if witnesses could save him, but the cameras were only watching. When he finally walked off, my legs started to shake. I leaned a shoulder against my car and stared at my hands like they belonged to someone else. Relief came first, sharp and sweet. Then shame tried to creep in, the old habit of blaming myself for the mess he made. I forced that habit down. Ella deserved a mother who did not apologize for being protected today. Still, as we left the garage, my gratitude tangled with fear. Luca had moved pieces on a board I did not know existed. He had found Evan's weak spots and documented them before Evan showed his face. Part of me wanted to ask what else he had learned about me, how much of my life could be reduced to a folder. I was not a case file. I was a person, and Ella was not a bargaining chip for anyone, not even the man who saved us. On the ride back, I decided we needed boundaries, spoken and honored always. By the time we reached the penthouse, my anger cooled into focus. I would protect Ella with truth, not more pretending. Luca absorbed that without flinching, and I felt him adjust, not resist. He proposed a public family moment, a private room reserved at one of his restaurants, an evening meant to steady our story. It would tell my relatives and any lurking enemies that we were stable, not scrambling. My stomach tightened because stability sounded like commitment. I pictured Ella in her little dress, holding her tiny purse like treasure, and I sensed something waiting inside it for us. By the time we left the penthouse, Ella was vibrating with a kind of excitement I couldn't explain. She wore her little cardigan like armor and clutched a tiny purse against her belly as if it contained a living thing. Luca was unusually precise, checking his watch, adjusting our coats, guiding us through the lobby with calm intention. My family members were all, somehow, available. Even my father had answered the invite. That coincidence sat on my tongue like a warning. Public love meant public targets. If tonight moved too fast, Ella would be the one who paid for it. Luca's flagship restaurant glowed on a corner in Midtown, all soft amber windows and polished stone. Inside, the scent of baked bread and citrus hit me like a memory of holidays I'd never been able to afford. We were guided upstairs, away from the main room, into a private space that felt like a promise. Candles flickered along a long table. Place cards waited at each setting, my name written neatly as if it belonged there. Marco lingered near the doorway, not looming, just present, the quiet reminder that safety still had edges. I tried to breathe without flinching once. My mother arrived first, dressed in confidence, but her eyes softened when she saw Ella. My father followed, quiet as always, carrying the weight of what he never said. Haley came with a careful smile, the kind that meant she was trying. 2 cousins hovered behind her, suddenly attentive now that Luca's name was on the door. Tasha slipped in beside me and squeezed my elbow, grounding me without questions. I watched faces shift as if someone had turned the room's lighting warmer. I still felt exposed, but for once I wasn't alone in it, and that mattered tonight. More. Food arrived in waves, plates set down with practiced grace, but I barely tasted anything at first. I kept checking Ella's face for signs of confusion, watching how she leaned toward Luca like he was familiar furniture. Luca stayed calm, touching nothing that wasn't offered, letting my family read him at their own pace. I could feel my mother's opinions lining up in her throat, ready to fire. I could feel my own fear underneath it all, whispering that public commitment invites public consequences. Still, the room felt steadier than any place had in years, and my shoulders dropped slightly. Then Luca stood, and the clink of silverware seemed to pause with him. I remember the way he looked at me first, like he was asking permission without making a show of it. What he shared wasn't a performance. In my mind, it landed as truth. This had started as pretending, a shield for one night. But it turned real because I refused to stay invisible. He honored my work, the long hospital hours, the rent math, the mothering done on fumes. He acknowledged the warehouse line I drew for civilians. The room held its breath with me right then. When he reached into his pocket, my body understood before my brain did. A small box appeared, and suddenly the air felt too thin. I saw a ring that caught candlelight like a steady star, and I felt the old fear rise, the fear that saying yes means losing myself. I thought of Evan's absence, and how it taught me to expect disappointment. I thought of Ella's soft hands, and how she deserved stability that didn't vanish. I noticed my mother's face cracking open, and my father blinking hard. My hands shook, but my answer formed anyway in my chest. Before I could drown in the silence, Ella snapped the room back to life. She climbed onto her chair, opened her tiny purse with care, and rummaged like someone on an assignment. Out came a little velvet pouch, and inside were 2 plain wedding bands. She lifted them proudly, eyes bright, as if she had guarded the most important secret on earth. The tension broke into laughter and tears. Tasha blinked hard, overwhelmed. My mother's rigid posture melted, and for the first time I saw her looking at us with something like hope. Even Marco's face softened for a beat. After that, everything moved at once and somehow slowly. Arms wrapped around me, plates were forgotten. Someone took photos, and I let them, because this time I didn't feel like an accident in the frame. Luca slid the ring onto my finger with steady hands, and the weight felt like a promise I could choose. Ella beamed like she'd completed her mission and leaned against my side. Haley wiped her eyes and laughed. My father stood near me longer than usual, saying nothing but staying. The night didn't erase danger, but it made love visible. Marco stayed quiet, guarding edges. Later, when the room emptied, Luca led me onto a terrace into clean air. Below us, traffic hissed like rain. My ring caught the skyline lights, and I stared until my eyes stung. I admitted this began as survival, a lie meant to keep Ella and me from being crushed, but it was becoming a life with real choices. That truth scared me more than warehouses ever did. Love requires boundaries and courage, not one brave night. I knew the next chapter wasn't an ending. It was learning how to live, for real, for good, and dancing again without pretending.